With Nintendo Switch 2 arriving with us just a day before release, there's little time for Digital Foundry to put together any kind of comprehensive coverage. But there are a number of system features I was curious to test out, none more important than backwards compatibility. Does Switch 2 improve the performance of Switch 1 games running under backwards compatibility? The first game I tested was Batman Arkham Knight, described by our very own Oliver Mackenzie as quote-unquote the worst performing software I have reviewed to date at Digital Foundry. I checked in with Oliver this morning and he says that 18 months on, it still is the worst performing software he's ever reviewed at Digital Foundry. But the good news is that Switch 2 fixes all of its performance issues, at times doubling frame rates. Put simply, Switch 1 games do run better on Switch 2. Now, Batman Arkham Knight is a game with a long and storied history for Digital Foundry, not least because of its highly compromised PC version, which was so bad at launch it was pulled from sale before returning in an improved but still poor shape. The Switch version, though, I played it for the first time today on original hardware, and it remains the same quote-unquote unmitigated disaster we reported on back in December 2023. We've talked a lot about impossible ports for the Switch, and we've seen games like Doom Eternal arrive on the console in compromised form, but still delivering a good experience. Batman Arkham Knight, unfortunately, does not do that. For the purposes of our testing, though, this actually makes for an interesting challenge for Switch 2 backwards compatibility, as the evidence suggests that Arkham Knight pushes all system components beyond tolerable limits. Graphically, the original game is rich and detailed, pushing a lot of detail in its characters and its open world. Meanwhile, the fact that it is an open world means that the CPU is pushed hard, streaming in and decompressing data. And finally, gigantic stutters, continual stutters found in the Switch port, also suggests that maybe storage is being stressed as well. The end result is astonishingly poor. There are graphical compromises that Switch 2 can never fix, dramatically poorer textures, no anti-aliasing, the fixed 810p resolution, but what's truly remarkable is just how bad that performance is. Based on measurements of capture taken today, Switch's stuttering problems extend to 180 millisecond frame times, hitting the user in rapid succession, often depressing performance under 20 FPS but feeling a lot worse. Driving sections in particular are borderline unplayable, I'd say. The 30 FPS frame rate cap is almost advisory in nature, bearing in mind that in real-world performance terms, you don't really get there for the vast majority of play. Going into our Switch 2 testing, we'd received no indication from Nintendo on whether back compat would actually be any faster than running the game on original hardware. So Wii titles don't run any better on Wii U, for example, but Switch 2 is clearly different. It's not using full hardware backwards compatibility as such, it's effectively using a translation layer to run the original game code on the new system. So in this scenario, it would probably be a lot harder to limit games to original performance levels as opposed to just letting the new system run those titles with whatever system resources the Switch 2 can throw at them. The end result is that, remarkably, Batman Arkham Knight is as fixed as it can be on Switch 2 without going back to the game and optimizing it. While Arkham Knight still possesses ugly pared back textures and hideous aliasing problems, it runs as flawlessly as it's possible to get with the original code. Extra CPU and extra GPU power in combination with faster storage effectively brute force the game to be everything it possibly can be, given the design constraints placed on the original code. Is it perfect? Well, in Batmobile driving while frame rate is fixed, animation errors hove their way into view, so despite a locked 30 FPS, something still doesn't look right. Extra horsepower for Switch 1 games, though, it's clearly there, and this sets the scene for a more detailed Digital Foundry investigation into backwards compatibility on Switch 2. But based on initial testing, I feel there's grounds for optimism here, profound optimism even. Take The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, for example. It's another port that truly pushed Switch hard. We'd argue that in many ways it's as good as you can possibly get on the older hardware, but developer Saber Interactive used every trick in the book to get the game running, and there are problems. Settlements like Novigrad push CPU hard even on PC and more powerful consoles, and obviously it's struggling on Switch. Meanwhile, image quality is compromised as the game leans heavily into dynamic resolution scaling. Looking very quickly at the game running on Switch 2, and Novigrad is running at 30 frames per second locked. And yeah, even a 180 millisecond frame time skip just disappears on Switch 2. I haven't run the resolution metrics, we've literally just started looking at this, but it's clear to see that image quality is significantly improved, meaning that extra horsepower is going to the game and improving dynamic resolution scaling results. So Arkham Knight, Witcher 3, these are go-to games for testing Switch 2 backwards compatibility performance enhancements, and as I said, initial impressions are positive. What isn't quite so positive is that on the handheld screen you're still getting handheld versions of Switch 1 games designed for a native 720p screen, meaning that every game will be upscaled to 1080p in what looks like a very basic scaling technique there. Probably asking for too much here, but the option to force original Switch games to run in their docked modes would clearly improve matters on games that aren't reliant on handheld specific features, like the touchscreen support in Super Mario Maker 2 for example. We'll be reporting back with more Switch 2 backwards compatibility testing soon, but as a first impression on launch day, yep, it's looking pretty good I'd say, though expect to see some bugs along the way. And yes, a shame that there's little in the way of enhancements like increased anisotropic filtering for example, as you see on Xbox back compat. Still, more to come, and I hope you enjoyed this little video. Like, subscribe, share if you did, but for now, thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.